Okay, so last week we read verse 1 of chapter 5, which still discusses the wedding. The famous verse is Bati Lagani Achoti Kala. I came to my garden, my sister, my bride, and everybody's feasting and partying, and everything is wonderful. And that is the end. And that's verse 1 of chapter 5. As we mentioned, the way the division of the chapters was not a Jewish division, according to logic, but also according to the commentaries. The third song in other words, the third section is concluded after that verse, and now we start a new story, and the new story is a total different period. It's a very abrupt shift because you get from the wedding to a point of there is separation. She is in the home. He is outside. He is knocking on the door, asking her to open for him. It's at night. It's raining, maybe like last night. And she doesn't really open, and we'll see the story. It's a little bit sad, I should say. And so I'm a little bit reluctant to study this on holiday of Sukkot, but hopefully if we stick around and we get to the Hasidic commentary, that shifts a little. But the story itself is very clear. So we're going to read again, we're studying this on multiple levels, on the pshat, the simple level, the historic level, and then the spiritual Kabbalistic level. So the simple level does not need any commentary because the plot is pretty clear in this part of the story, unlike other parts of the story, which is much more poetic and hard to understand. Here it's quite clear. So we're going to open up the verses and read it, and we'll see what happens. What happened? Okay, can't find it anymore. Up again. Okay, here we go. So that was last week, was verse 1, which was the wedding. Now we get to verse 2. I sleep. I am asleep. The woman is speaking. Ani yeshena. I sleep. It's clear. It has a hey, so it's feminine. I sleep, but my heart is awake. Hark, my beloved is knocking. Kol, the sound of my beloved is not knocking. Open for me, my sister, my beloved, my dove, my perfect one. So he is outside, she is asleep, but her heart is awake. He is knocking on the door, saying, open for me. And then he's trying to get her attention. So he gives her all of his endearing, all of her, he calls her by various endearing names. My beloved, my sister, my beloved, my dove, my perfect one. And he says, you gotta let me in. For my head is full of dew, my locks with the drops of the night. I guess it's not like last night. Last night is very rainy, but in Middle East, in Israel, it doesn't rain that strong. My grandmother used to come from Israel, and she could not take her upstate New York. She could not figure out how it just rains for a day straight. It just, even in Israel, it rains for 20 minutes. In any case, he says, you got to let me in. My head is full of dew. My locks of the hair, have drops of the night. The problem is she doesn't want to open up. Why? It's too much work. She's already undressed. She already cleaned her feet, right? The floor was dirt. So before you went into bed, you had to clean your feet. Otherwise, your bed will get dirty. So what happens if you just got into bed and then someone's at the door? Now you just say, I just washed my feet. Now I'm going to have to go out of bed, open up, wash my feet again, go back in. It's too much work. So she says in verse 3, I have taken off my tunic. How can I put it on? I have bathed my feet. How can I soil them? Right? She's too comfortable in bed. I'm going to have to go back again, go get dressed, go outside. Then I'm going to have to make my feet dirty again. It's too much work. So he's knocking, and she's like, it's too convenient. It's too comfortable to be in bed. Verse continues, verse 4. My beloved stretched forth his hand from the hole, and my insides stirred because of him. So the way it would work, the lock in those days, next to your door, there was a hole. You would stick your hand in, and then you would stick the key in. So there was a hole next to every door. And so the beloved, the man, is trying to get in. Ooh. the man is trying to get in. So he sticks his hand through the hole, trying to open up the lock, tamper with the lock. And because she sees how he insists he wants to come in and she sees his hand, then she is moved. My insides stirred because of may I is inside may I am, but in the words of the prophets and the writings, it's also like the heart. The heart can also be considered may I. So she says, my heart stirred for him. So now she decides, okay, it's time to get up, to open up the door. Verse 5, I arose to open for my beloved, and my hands dripped with myrrh. In other words, her hands are full of perfume. It's not clear what she's doing with the perfume. If it was on before, she's putting it on now. It doesn't matter. The bottom line is, and my fingers were flowing, and my fingers was flowing myrrh upon the handles of the lock. Seems like she's trying to open up the lock, but she can't because the hands are too oily. So it is a delay here. Right, in those days, the spices were oil. They would cook the oil with spices, and that's the way they created the perfume. So she's got perfume on her hands. She's trying to open up the lock. It's not working. Finally, verse 6, I opened for my beloved, but my beloved had hidden and was gone. Chamak means, I don't know why they translate hidden. Chamak means he slipped away. By the time she gets the door open, he's already gone. My soul went out when he spoke. I sought him, but found him not. I called him, but he did not answer me. So apparently she's calling for him. She's looking for him. It's too late. She's gone. He's gone. Now, verse 7. Apparently, she doesn't stay at the door, but she's looking around town for him. She's looking around the city. And if you remember earlier in the song, she also met the guards of the city, and she told the guards that she's looking for her beloved, and the guards helped her search. But over here, everything shifts. The guards are not helping her search. To the contrary, the guards get in the way. So let's read verse 7. The watchmen who patrol the city found me. They smote me and wounded me. The watchmen of the walls took my jewelry off me. That's the end of the story. She can't find him. Now she turns to the daughters of Jerusalem. And this is a fascinating verse because this verse, the beginning of the verse, appeared already at least twice in the song. But those two previous times, the conclusion was different. And here there's a new conclusion. So let's read verse 8. I adjure you, O daughters of Jerusalem. Hishbati etchem, I make you promise. Earlier, what the verse kept saying is, don't awaken the love before it's desirous. In other words, what she took away from her experience is, if you remember in chapter 2 and chapter 3, she says, don't awaken the love when it's too premature. And that's the conclusion of the verse that begins, Hishbati etchem, I adjure you, O daughters of Jerusalem. But here in verse 8, it changes. Now, when she sees the daughters of Jerusalem, she says, I adjure you, I make you swear. I adjure you that what? If you find my beloved, what will you tell him? That I am lovesick. In other words, what she's telling them, till now she was telling them, that love, let it develop by itself. Don't be too passionate with your love because the other person may not be ready. Here, the message is totally different. She says, if you find my beloved, who obviously is not lovesick because he's gone, he left, and she can't find him, and she's calling him, and he's not answering. So obviously, the intensity of her love is much stronger. But she tells the daughters of Jerusalem, I make you promise that if you happen to find him, what should you tell him? Tell him that I am lovesick. And then we'll stop here. The song continues. They ask him, what's unique about your beloved? There are other beloveds, and she describes how beautiful he is and how amazing he is. We'll leave that for next time. You know what? We should read it for this time. So why not? We'll read it. Why not? Then they respond. She just told the daughters of Jerusalem how she just told the daughters of Jerusalem, if you find my beloved, tell him that I am lovesick. So they asked her, what is your beloved more than another beloved? In other words, what's greater than? Why is he better than anybody else? O fairest of women. What is your beloved more than other beloved that you have so adjured us? In other words, what's so unique about this guy that you made us promise that we only want him and tell him that I am lovesick? Now she praises him. Up to this point in the previous chapter, he praised her and described the beauty of her body and how she does the same to him. My beloved is white and ruddy, surrounded by myriads. His head is as the finest gold. His locks are curled. They are as black as a raven. His eyes are like doves beside rivers of water, bathing in milk, fitly set. His jaws are like a bed of spice, growths of aromatic plants. His lips are like roses dripping with flowing mirth. His hands are like wheels of gold set with chrysolite, whatever that is. His abdomen is as a block of ivory overlaid with sapphires. His legs are as pillars of marble founded upon sockets of fine gold. His appearance is like the Lebanon, chosen as the cedars. His palate is sweet, and he is altogether desirable. And this is the conclusion. This is my beloved, and this is my friend, O daughters of Jerusalem. Because they said, what's so special about this guy? Why are you so excited about this guy? So she gives a whole description, and he says, this is my beloved, and this is why, and this is my beloved, explaining why she only wants him and she is lovesick for him. So that's the verse. That's pretty much chapter 5. It's beginning from verse 2. It is a little bit sad because you see here how they missed each other. When he was knocking, she was lying in bed and she was distracted. She was too comfortable to get out of bed and open up the door for her. By the time she's ready, he's gone. And it doesn't end well. At least in this verse, it doesn't. At least in this chapter. And by the way, yeah, I'm not sure the book it ends well in general. That's another discussion. But at least in this chapter, the meeting, they don't meet again. And she is actually hit. And she's smitten, and the guards take away her jewelry. This is not a simple scene. So that's the simple level. That's the pshat. Then we're going to get to the historic level, and thank God there's enough tragedy in Jewish history that there's actually two ways of reading this entire story of when it applies to. Both are fascinating, so we'll do both. We'll do Rashi, and then we'll do the other commentaries. And then, if we have time, we'll do the Hasidic interpretation. And if not, we'll do it next time, but the Hasidic interpretation hopefully will make it a little bit more positive. So that's the story in short. In the meantime, comments or questions are not only welcome, but encouraged. Yes, go ahead, Vicky.
I had a question, maybe I missed it. How does it correspond to the first verse of chapter 5? Because I don't see the flow.
Let's assume it doesn't. According to the Jewish commentaries, the chapter break should not be there. The chapter breaks, whoever divided the chapters did it wrong from the Jewish perspective. The chapters were not divided by a Jewish source. It was divided by a priest. About what he was thinking, I don't know. Last week, I tried a little bit to explain why maybe a reason that even at the party, there is some problem. Other people say part of the problem was, okay, let's leave it alone. Let's assume for the purpose of simplicity, let's assume that the previous verse is part of the previous story. In other words, verse 1, chapter 5, verse 1 should have been part of chapter 4.
Right.
So we're dividing up chapters. We're going to call it a stories here, different songs. We just concluded, if I'm not mistaken, we just concluded the third song, the third section, and chapter 1, what is chapter 1 of verse 5, is part of the previous song describing the wedding.
Yeah, that makes more sense.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank
you. Yes.
But then also about the praises, he's praising her in her face, and she's praising him to the daughters of Jerusalem. So it's not. This is a communication problem, right?
It could be he's praising her. Let's take a look. It could be he's praising her. He's giving a wedding speech. He's talking to the people at the wedding. I don't want to get into that, but the bottom line is, in the previous verse, I don't want to get into it too deeply now because it's not our subject, but verse 1, nobody knows what the friends are doing here. I've come to my garden, my sister, my bride. I've gathered my mirth with my spice. I've eaten my sugar cane with my sugar. I have drunk my wine with my milk. These are descriptions. These are erotic descriptions, okay? It's a metaphor. So he's basically saying, I'm getting all the pleasure I can. Now he says, eat, friends, drink, ye drink abundantly, beloved ones. What are the friends doing there? It's supposed to be intimate. It's supposed to be an intimate situation, right?
Correct.
So somehow this could continue connect to what we said earlier, that the king does really cannot be intimate really, because there's too many people in the palace. And we discussed this earlier when she said his canopy is full of the love of the daughters of Jerusalem, right? What does that mean? It means that for him, he's got this chance. So it's possible. All I'm trying to say is it's possible that the descriptions in the previous verse, in the previous chapter, is he may be telling her, I have to double check. No, he's talking to her. He's talking to her. It could be that he's talking first person. He's talking to her. It could be there's an audience. So I'm retracting what I said. The audience doesn't really appear until chapter 5. Maybe that's why they switched the chapters there. Maybe that's why they put chapter 1 over here, because they sense that chapter 1 is sort of a problem in the sense that it's not a continuation. There are other people there, but I don't want to get into that. But the bottom line is, yes, when he was talking to her, he was talking in first person. The problem here in chapter 5 is she would be loved to talk to him, but he's gone. And when he was knocking and she had the opportunity to talk to him, she wasn't talking to him, right? So there's a lot of missed opportunities here, and nowhere in the entire book, but nowhere is it more clear than in this story in verse 2, 3, 4, 5, that he's knocking, she's not opening. By the time she opens, he's gone. Right? That's like the epitome. I mean, the pattern happened earlier. Remember, we showed that earlier in chapter 1 and chapter 2, but here it's so clear that this is sort of the chief challenge, the major challenge here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, now we want to talk about what historical time is it that after the wedding, she's asleep. Oh, a lot of water. No worries, a lot of water. She's asleep. He's banging. He's knocking on the door, and by the time she wakes up, it's too late. So there are really two ways of reading this, and the more famous one is the one that Rashi doesn't say. Why is it more famous? I don't know. Probably because also because of there's various reasons. We'll see. It will become clear as when we discuss it. But give me a minute, and I'll find. Okay, we'll start with the first one, and then we'll start with Rashi says and some of the commentaries, and then we'll go to the second interpretation. That's also interesting. First interpretation is, if the wedding, as we said, is the giving of a Torah and the building of the temple, right? We said the Yom Simchas Liba, the Yom Chasanasai, the day of his nuptials, the day of his marriage, and the day of the rejoicing of his heart is the building of a temple, is the giving of a Torah and the building of a temple. So and we said that according to the Mishnah, we're talking about the building of a temple in Jerusalem. So that's the wedding. The honeymoon's over. And if you see the period of the first temple, you would expect everything to say that the story to be in the first temple, they lived happily ever after. But of course, that didn't happen because it's a real story. It's a real love story. Nobody lives happily ever after. So what happens? There are challenges, right? In other words, the drama of the book starts after the wedding. Yeah, it's not, oh, we got married and the story is over. No, now the real drama begins. So what happened historically? Historically is that the people start serving idols. And God, in other words, they're asleep. They're asleep. They're asleep from their relationship with God. They're not cognizant of the relationship with God. The marriage is over. They're asleep. God is knocking on the door. What does it mean that God is knocking on the door? As you will see in Rashi, God is knocking on the door means God is sending the prophets. God is sending the prophets. We're not opening. We're too comfortable. we're too comfortable. And because we're too comfortable, we don't open up the door. But God continues to insist. He puts his hand, my beloved puts his hand through the door, represents an even greater investment, as we will discuss. At some point, we're awakened. When we are awakened, what happens? We come to open up the door for God. And we'll see historically that the people did return. In the days of Chizkiah, the people do return. However, it's too late. Why is it too late? It's too late. Either because the redemption, the repentance wasn't complete, or for other reasons, but it was too late. And indeed, my beloved is gone, which brings about the destruction of the temple. And that's how the guards find me and beat me and take away my jewelry. That's a description of the Babylonians destroying the first temple. That's one way to read it, and we'll follow Rashi, and we'll read it. We'll try to do it relatively quickly, and then we'll go to that's one way of reading this historically. We have one more way, and then we're going to hopefully make try to pivot to the Hasidic interpretation. But this is so fascinating. I want you to get the feel. I want you to read it inside. So we'll see what happens here. Okay, Song of Songs. We'll open up the Rashi. We'll make some progress. Show Rashi's commentary. Here we go. Ani Yeshena. I sleep.
So is the last part Rashi or not Rashi?
Everything I said tonight was Rashi. Yeah.
Okay.
The new thing is going to be the other way of reading it. I'll give you the heads up. The other way of reading it is it's really the second temple. In other words, the God knocking on the door is Cyrus giving the Jewish people permission to come build the second temple. And the second temple would have been as glorious as the first, and the people would restore their independence as they had in the first temple, had they awakened and moved to Jerusalem and moved to Israel. But instead, they all remained in the diaspora. Most of them, majority of the Jewish people were too comfortable in Babylonia to move to Israel. So that's the metaphor. I'm lying in bed. I don't want to move to Israel. By the time they decided to move to Israel, it was already too late. And therefore, the second temple was not a complete redemption. The Jewish people did not have real independence. At some points, they had autonomy, but really, they were always under the superpower, either the Greeks, first the Greeks, and then the Romans, even when the temple stood. So there was no real presence of God to be felt in the second temple. And according to that reading, it's a result of the fact that when God knocked, we weren't listening. And of course, this has ramifications. People read this, and explain that there's so many times in history where they had opportunity to awaken. God is sending us a message, and if we don't listen and we don't tune in, there could be negative consequences, so to speak. So that's another story. Rabbi Soloveitchik wrote a famous letter quoting this verse, talking about Zionism and saying that Zionism is God knocking on the door. Others say the 6-day war, the God showing his miracles. So you could take this in so many different directions. We'll get to that in a second. I first want to show you Rashi, and then we'll get, maybe if I find the source, I'll do I believe it's Targum, and other people say it. I just can't find it this second. But let's start with Rashi, and then we'll go to the second one, hopefully. And then we still need to do the Hasidic interpretation, which maybe we'll do next week. We'll see how long this takes us. Okay, so I sleep. So in other words, the wedding is over. She's in bed. When I was confident and tranquil in the first temple, I despaired of worshiping the Holy One, blessed be He, as one who sleeps and slumbers. In other words, I fell asleep. When someone's asleep, they're not cognizant, they're not thinking logically. So I'm comfortable, I'm in bed, I'm serving idols. But my heart is awake. This is the Holy One, blessed be He. So it is explained in the Psikta. And the Medrash says, my heart is awake. What's my heart? There are different ways of doing it. My heart is either the core of the person, but another way to say it, God is awake. My heart, the heart of the Jewish people is God. So we'll get to that when we get to the Hasidic commentary. But my heart is awake. The Holy One, blessed be He, who is the rock of my heart and my portion, is awake to guard me and to favor me. He quotes a verse from Tehillim, chapter 73. Sur levavi v'chalki Elokim. God is the strength of my heart and my portion. In other words, I am asleep. We are not cognizant of God, but my heart is awake. God is awake, and God is protecting us in the first temple. Hark, my beloved is knocking. He causes his Shekhinah to rest upon the prophets, and he admonishes them by sending them betimes. In other words, what does it mean that God's knocking on the door? God is sending prophets to wake us up. Open for me. What does it mean? God needs us to open the door. Do not cause me to withdraw from you. What does it mean that God says, you got to let me in because it's raining and my hair just is getting wet, right? I don't have that problem, but people invest and they get their hair done, and then then it's going to rain, it's going to ruin their hair. So the man is standing outside knocking on the door and saying, open up the door because my hair is getting wet. Now God, what does it mean? God needs us to let him in. How does this, what is that in the historical reading? So Rashi says like this, a term, first Rashi describes the metaphor, a term referring to a man who comes at night, knocking on the door of his beloved. He says thus, because of love for you, I have come at night at the time of dew and rain. And the allegory is that my head is full of dew because I am full of goodwill and satisfaction with Abraham, your father, whose deeds pleased me like dew. And behold, I come to you loaded with blessings and the payment of reward for good deeds if you return to me. In other words, what is he saying? When I come, when you want to meet somebody, you don't come middle of the night knocking on the door when it's raining. You come at lunchtime. You come, you make an appointment at lunchtime. But what Rashi is saying, when this man is knocking on a door on a light and saying, open up the door, it's raining, what he's really saying is, I really want you. And therefore, I'm coming in an hour that's not usual, right? Not like today. People, the cities are awake 24 hours a day. Nobody traveled the night. It was dangerous. If he's coming to her in the rain, it's because he really loves her. And that's what Rashi is saying. God is telling us, open up because I love you because of the dew and the rain, which is a metaphor for the actions of Abraham, the patriarchs. Abraham, he mentions Abraham specifically. With my locks with drops of the night, in my hands there are also many categories of types of retribution. To exact retribution from those who forsake me and anger me, dew is an expression of connoting pleasure. So here, what Rashi is saying is, there's two clauses. He says, open up because my head is full of dew. That's the positive. If you open up, we can reestablish our loving relationship with God. But rain is a metaphor of wrath. It's strength. It could cause destruction. It also has blessing, but it also has negative connotations, as we saw in the last flood in New York. The bottom line is the prophets are saying there's two ways it can go positive or negative. Okay, we'll skip the next one. It's just getting to the word revivim. We'll get to that. We'll keep going because I want to cover ground. I've taken off my tunic. What does it mean? She's saying, I'm lying in bed. I'm too comfortable to open up my door. So he says, I already have the habits. Says Rashi, I already accustomed myself to other ways. I can no longer return to you, as it is stated in Jeremiah. But since we stopped burning incense to the Queen of Heaven, etc., for these ways were proper in their eyes, and the expression I have taken off my tunic, I have bathed my feet, is the language of an adulterous wife who does not wish to open the door for her husband. And since Scripture commenced with the language of I sleep, hark, my beloved is knocking, it concludes with an expression proposed to an expression of knocking at the door at the time retiring to sleep at night. So Rashi, we can really take this apart if we have the time. Rashi is saying there's a scene of an adulterous wife where the husband is banging and she says, oh, I can't. I'm not wearing any clothing. My feet are dirty. She just doesn't want to open him up. He doesn't want him to see what's going on inside. What's happening here is, again, the idols. She's serving idols. She's not interested in making time for her husband. And what's happening here is that she's saying, I'm too comfortable. I'm too comfortable in my new ways. I'm too comfortable with my new habits. My beloved stretched forth his hand from the hole, which is beside the door. I'm reading Rashi on 4. And I saw his hand, and the stirring of my insides turned within me to return to his love and to open for him. Right? We're inspired because of the prophets, God sending his hand in. It's at some point we were inspired to return to God. I arose to open for my beloved, and my hands dripped with mirth, wholeheartedly and with a desiring soul, as one who adorns herself to endear herself to her husband with a pleasant scent. So Rashi says, oh, what is this? What is the myrrh doing here? Why is she wearing the perfume? Because now she is in love with her beloved, so she wants to endear herself. With flowing mirth, with a fragrance that flows and spreads to all parts. And the problem is, but my beloved had hidden and was gone. Chamak was hidden and concealed from me, like below the curves of your thighs. The word chamak, he says, concealed. The hidden places of your thighs, because the thigh is hidden. Also, Jeremiah, how long will you hide? Tischam ki. Will you hide and cover yourself because of the shame that you betrayed me? In other words, this is just Rashi dealing with the word. What is the word chamak? I said in modern Hebrew, I said it slipped away. But Rashi is saying no. The way they're translating, Rashi saying is Hamak is hidden, as he proves from this song itself in 7:2. But we don't have to get into the grammar right now. But in other words, the bottom line is Rashi says he's gone. My soul went out when he spoke, for he said, I will not come into your house because at first you did not wish to open. In other words, Rashi doesn't explain it yet. We'll see later. Rashi will address it, but right now we don't know why the man ran away. It seems like because the delay was too long. The watchmen who patrol the city found me and apprehend the thieves who prowl at night. In other words, the watchmen are making sure nobody's supposed to be walking around at night. It's not like New York City. You're walking around at night, you're up to no good. She's walking around at night looking for a beloved, but the watchmen say, you're trouble. So they smote me and wounded me. They inflicted a wound upon me. Every instance of petza is an expression of wounding. Okay, I don't want to get into the Hebrew. They took my jewelry, Hebrew redidi. I'm not getting into, okay, let's read it. Why not? My jewelry that was hammered and beaten. That's the word redidi, because the jewelry is hammered. That's why the word for redid, for jewelry, is redid, which comes from the word related to hammering. And the entire episode is an expression of a wife of one's youth who bewails the husband of her youth and searches for him. And this is the allegorical meaning. Now Rashi explains the nimshal, the allegory, the analog. My beloved stretched forth his hand from the hole. When I said, I have bathed my feet, and I will not open for you, I will not repent of the idolatry that I have chosen. God stretched forth his hand and demonstrated his vengeance in the days of Achaz, and he brought upon him the army of the king of Aram, and they smote him and captured from their great captivity. And Pekach, the son of Ramaliah, slew in Judah 120,000 in one day. In other words, Rashi is saying, go look through the history of the first temple, and you see that every now and then the kingdom of Judea, the Jewish people, were overrun by other nations that were oppressed, that were able to make inroads and attack them. And you shouldn't just read that as a mistake of history. That is God sending his hand to wake you up. So there's the first time knocking on the door is the prophets. But when you ignore the prophets, God sticks his hand through the hole, and that's even more insistent and more aggressive. And that's when God sends the other nations to attack the Jewish people. I opened for my beloved, but my beloved has hidden and was gone. He did not nullify his decree. In other words, even after we repent, no, what am I saying? I'm sorry, I missed the Rashi. And my inside stirred because of him. In other words, at some point, because of the prophets and because of the oppression, we did repent and we did turn to God. Where do we see this? Says Rashi, Chizkiah, his son, came and repented with all his heart to seek the Holy One, blessed be he. Chizkiah was one of the greatest Jewish kings. In other words, the most righteous, and he inspired all the people to return to God. So when it says my inside stirred because of him, inside his heart, Rashi says Chizkiah returns to God with his whole heart and whole soul. And the entire generation was wholehearted. There never arose a generation in Israel like them, as delineated in chapter entitled Chelek, in the chapter of the Talmud, Sanhedrin. They searched from Dan and Beersheba and did not find an ignoramus, from Geba to Antioch, and did not find a man or a woman who was not well versed in the laws of ritual contamination and purity. In other words, the Talmud says that in the days of Chizkiah, they searched everywhere in the entire Israel, and everybody was learned, and everybody knew, men, women, children, everyone knew even the most complex laws of the Torah, which is the laws of ritual purity. So this historically, when my inside stirred because of him, that's in the days of Chizkiah when the people returned to God completely. This is the meaning of my hands dripped with myrrh. It is also stated regarding Josiah, which is Yehoshua. Now before him there was no king like him, for he saw the retribution that has come upon Manasseh and upon Ammon. To fulfill the words, he stretched forth his hand from the hole, and my inside stirred because of him. So in other words, we get to the point where you have kings, especially Chizkiah, who turn to God with all their heart and all their soul. I opened for my beloved. So what's the problem? We opened the door. We did teshuvah. Why is God gone? Why does the destruction happen? Rashi says, it's too late. Rashi explains what that means. I opened for my beloved, but my beloved was hidden and was gone. He did not nullify his decree, as it is stated regarding Chizkiah. Behold, the time shall come when everything in your palace shall be carried off to Babylonia, and some of your sons whom you shall beget These are Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Isaiah, and also as it is stated concerning Josiah through Huldah the prophetess. Behold, I bring calamity upon this place and upon its inhabitants. And Scripture states, now before him there was no king like him. Nevertheless, the Lord did not turn back from his great wrath, for his wrath was kindled against Judah because of all the provocations of Manasseh that Manasseh had provoked him. And the Lord said, I will remove Judah too from before me, as I have moved Israel, and I will reject this city. Seems to me what's happening here is like this. God, because Chizkiah returned to God with his whole heart and with his whole soul, what happened is the decree was pushed off. In other words, in Chizkiah's times, Jerusalem was spared. But it did not push away the decree entirely. And ultimately, the exile came about. My soul went out when he spoke. It left me when he spoke this word. In other words, my soul went out when I heard this news that my beloved is gone. My soul departed. In other words, a sign of yearning. I sought him, but found him not. Now, if you ask, was not Jeremiah standing and prophesying during the days of Yoakam and Sidkiah? Return to me, and I will return to you. Rashi is asking a question. If God left, and God is no longer interested in getting the people to repent because God is gone, so why is there still prophets in the final generation of the destruction of the first temple of the kingdom of the first temple in the days of the last two kings, which were Yehoiakim and then Sidkiah, which was the king that was appointed by the king of Babylonia? The bottom line is, why was there still prophets? Why was still Jeremiah being sent to God by God to the people saying repent, if it was too late at that point? So Rashi says this was not to nullify the decree, but to mitigate the punishment and to prepare their kingdom for the time when they would return from the exile, to plant them without being uprooted and to build it without being demolished. In other words, at that point, the decree was going to happen. The exile would take place. The only question is how severe it would be. One more verse. The watchman found me. Nebuchadnezzar, and we'll do another little bit. Nebuchadnezzar and his armies. Nebuchadnezzar is the king of Babylonia who destroys the temple. They found me, who patrol the city to wreak the vengeance of the omnipresent. In other words, don't make a mistake. Nebuchadnezzar is just a political power trying to get power and conquering the Jewish people. He is the shomer. He's the guard. He's guarding God's city. He's implementing the divine decree. They took my jewelry from me. What's the jewelry? The jewelry is the temple. The watchmen of the walls, even the ministering angels who were guarding its walls, as is stated in Isaiah, on your walls, O Jerusalem, etc., they ignited the fire upon it. Okay, we're going to skip it. One last verse. This is too beautiful. I adjure you, the Hetans, the Nebuchadnezzar's men, who saw Hananiah, Mishael, and Isaiah submitting themselves to the fiery furnace, and Daniel to the lion's den because of prayer, and Mordecai's generation in the days of Haman. This is so beautiful. So this is now the Gentiles. Right now we're already in exile in Babylonia and then in Persia. And the Gentiles see how the Jewish people are completely committed to God, to the extent that there was three prophets that were willing to throw themselves in the fire and not to serve the idol. And in the days of Mordecai and Esther in Persia, we were always loyal to God in the face of great oppression. So we're now telling the daughters of Jerusalem, somehow now the daughters of Jerusalem become the nations of the world. If you find my beloved, make you promise, if you find my beloved in the future on Judgment Day, for he will request you to testify about me, as it is stated in Isaiah, let them be present with their witnesses, and they may be deemed just. What will you tell him? In other words, we're in exile. God will come to you and say, no, what did the Jewish people do in exile? You, the nations of the world, will tell God that we were completely devoted to you. We were lovesick. We were willing to give our lives up to Hashem. So beautiful. Verse, what will you tell him? You will testify on behalf of me. Because of love for him, I suffered harsh tortures among you. Let Nebuchadnezzar come and testify. Let Eliphaz and Zophar and all the prophets of the heathens come and testify about me, that I fulfilled the Torah. And now it continues, the nations of the world are amazed. Why are we so devoted to God? And they ask us, why is your beloved more than any other beloveds? Why don't you trade him in for another guy? And that will stop here. So this is just the first way of reading the historical perspective. Like I said, there's one more way, which is the Koresh, goes to the second temple, but it's just so beautiful. It's like amazing. And this is even before we touch upon, it's sad, but beautiful. But like all good love stories are sad, but beautiful. But this is even before we get to the Kabbalistic interpretation, which is a little bit more positive and also very powerful. but let's see what happens. Let's see if I can find the other interpretation written, or otherwise they'll have to tell it to you by heart from memory, which I don't want to do, but I may have to do that. But in any case, in the meantime, comments, questions, anything you want to share, I would like to hear.
Well, I just had a general question about the Hasidic. Hasidic interpretation goes by Pshat or Rashi or both?
Not so much, more Pshat, not so much Rashi, because Rashi is talking about a historic perspective, and the Hasidic interpretation is less interested in the historic perspective. I don't care about Jeremiah, so to speak, about the prophets being sent to the people of the first temple. I'm more interested in what is God telling my soul when my soul is asleep, right? So
Makes
much
sense.
more. And in general, the Rebbe always explained there's 4 levels of Torah, Pshat, Remesh, Rusaid. The way and the sometimes the deepest and the most literal are connected.
Right. Thank you.
Okay, let's see if I could find this inside. Otherwise, I'll have to tell it to you by heart. Just like I said. Here it is. Okay. Okay, this is from the Targum. This is an Aramaic translation of a Torah. The problem, so I'm going to translate it as best as I can. The problem is that I'm not as fluent in Aramaic as I am in Hebrew, so I'm going to do my best to translate it. And it's Aramaic, so you have to give me a little slack. But here we go. But again, I'm just going to give you the general idea. The general idea is after the first temple, like I said, after the first temple, according to Rashi, we're talking about before the destruction. All this God knocking on the doors before the destruction of a temple. According to the Targum, no. That entire period of the first temple is not mentioned. That's sort of in the gap between verse 1 and verse 2, not mentioned. We go straight to the second. If we're asleep, what does it mean I'm asleep? Rashi said I'm asleep means I'm serving idols. The Targum says I am asleep means I'm in exile. I'm already in exile. And now we're talking about God not waking us up to bring us back to Jerusalem. And eventually, the problem, of course, is we delayed too much. We're too comfortable in Babylonia. Okay, so let's read from the Targum. Here we go. I'm going to try my best. The truth of the matter is, Evan Ezra is saying it in Hebrew too. So, okay, look at the Evan Ezra. This is good stuff. I just lost it.
But that doesn't exist on Chabad.org, right? This is somewhere else.
No, I'm reading. I'll show you what I'm reading from. I'll show you what I'm reading from. Give me just a second. Suvin. Now, the second interpretation is much more famous, and to the extent that when I hear people lecturing about the Song of Songs, they make a mistake. They think it's Rashi. Everyone says, "Oh, this is what Rashi says." As you know, that's not what Rashi says. But the second one is much more famous. Okay, you know what? I'm just going to do the Evan Ezra because he's shorter. Instead of doing the Medrash, the Evan Ezra is shorter, more concise. I'll do the Evan Ezra. So I am sharing a site here. It's actually a pretty cool site. It's called Al HaTorah. Al HaTorah is the site. So you have the verse, and the verse is here. And then on the verse, you have all different commentaries. This is from the Targum. This is the Medrash Rabbah. This is Rabbi Moshe Even Jiktila. Don't know who he is. You have Rashi. You have Lekach Tov. And again, every verse is all kinds of, there's all the commentaries on one page. And that's why I like this site. I'm going to the Evan Ezra. It says the Evan Ezra as follows. Ani Yeshena, I am asleep. Has the Jewish people tell God, even though I have been exiled to Babylonia. You see, we skipped. Rashi says we're talking about still in Israel, right? Before the destruction. But the Ibn Ezra says, I am asleep means even though I'm in Babylonia. Nevertheless, my heart is awake. My heart, the heart of the Jewish people was still loyal to God. We did not serve idols. The irony is that in Israel, we served idols. But once we were exiled to Babylonia, we didn't serve idols. That's the irony. But in any case, Kol Doidi Daifek, the voice of my beloved is knocking. Who is knocking? These are the prophets that God sent to the people in Babylonia that they should go back and build the temple and emerge and come out of Bavel. Says God, this is so poetic. Says God, please open the door, come back to Israel. My head is full of dew and raindrops, and my locks are getting ruined by the raindrops. What is the dew and the dew? What is the dew and the raindrops? This is fascinating. Rashi says, from the tears of the Jewish people crying in exile. He quotes the verse in Eicha, Lamentations, Bachai tivke balayla. She will cry at night. And night is a metaphor for the exile. So God says, enough with you crying. You're making my hair wet. Stop crying. Let's move. Open the door. Let's reunite. Go back to Israel. Now, Rashi continues. The Ibn Ezra continues. So the first interpretation the Ibn Ezra says is that God knocking on the door is the prophets inspiring the Jews to come back to Israel. But the second interpretation is more interesting. The second interpretation of the Ibn Ezra is that this is God awakening the spirit of Koresh, the Cyrus, the king of Persia, as written in the book of Ezra, to give the Jewish people permission to go back and rebuild the second temple. So when Cyrus, when the political leader says he can go back to Israel, it's not that he's doing it because he thinks it's good for him. He's doing it because this is God knocking on the door. We see God throughout history, and this interpretation is also beautiful. When God says, "Open up the door, go back to Israel," because my head is full of dew. Meaning I'm getting wet. What does it mean? God is homeless? He doesn't have a home? Says Rashi, yes, I don't have a home. He quotes a verse that says in the book of Samuel, God tells about the holy temple, that God says, I don't have a house until the Jewish people build a house for me. So when there's no temple, God is stuck outside in the rain. Then she says she was delayed, and she thought to herself, I already took off my garments, which Ibn Ezra says, Pashatati, I took off my garments. Shenitatzlu Yisrael la'alot livnot habayit. The Jewish people were lazy to go up, and lazy mean they were delayed. They weren't interested in going back to Israel because Babylonia was too comfortable and Israel was too difficult. So the story continues. Again, he's sending the prophets of Chagi, Hanavi, and Zechariah. God is again sticking his hand through the hole to encourage them to awaken. And this is again the prophets that God says to the Jewish people, sends the Jewish people to come up from Babylonia. So she went up and I opened up the door. What does it mean they opened up the door? They built the second temple. The Jewish people built the second temple. And at that point, it was very optimistic because the prophet said, we read the Haftorah, we discussed this when we discussed the Haftorah last year, the Haftorah of Shabbat Chanukah, where God says, the prophet speaks for God, he says, build the temple, I will come and dwell amongst you. says the Lord. So the Jewish people were sure that God will dwell amongst them and they will have the protection and the miracles that they experienced in the first temple. The reality is, however, says the Ibn Ezra, by the time I opened it, he was gone. Why was he gone? So he also looks at the verse. The verse is a beautiful verse. The verse says, I open up the door, but my hands are dripping from myrrh, which is the spice, which is the perfume. Seems like a beautiful thing. She perfumes her hands to be able to come close to God, to her beloved. Isn't that a good thing? But the Ibn Ezra reads this bad. He says, no, what it means is my hands were perfumed, but not my insides. In other words, the transformation was not internalized. And therefore, even though they opened up the door for God and they built the temple, but it was already too late. God did not dwell in them in the second temple, even though they built the second temple. The story continues. What does it mean? The guards came and found me and beat me. What happened in the second temple? Israel was overridden by who? By the Greeks. The story of Hanukkah, right? This is all the historic reading. They took away my jewelry. What does it mean? They took away my jewelry. The first reading was they destroyed the temple. The Ibn Ezra says they prevented me from doing the Torah, from performing the Torah and the mitzvot. That's what the Greeks did. And he says the same thing. He makes them promise that when you find my beloved, tell him I am lovesick and I'm completely devoted to him. Okay, so these are the two readings. Again, just to summarize, I think we'll stop here. We're already an hour. I think we'll summarize here. Next week we'll do the Kabbalistic reading. But to summarize, the first interpretation is that when is she asleep? She's asleep right after the wedding. Right after the wedding, after Solomon builds the temple, in the period of the first temple, she's already serving idols. She's not thinking straight. She's sleeping, and God sends the prophets to knock on the door, and when and that doesn't help, God sends his hand through the hole, which is he's sending armies to invade, and they still don't get the message. And by the time they get the message, it's already too late. The temple is destroyed. The second reading is the people are too comfortable in Babylonia. They're asleep. They're in exile, and God knocks on the door, says, open up. What is knocking? Either he sends the prophets or he sends the king of Persia, Cyrus, the king of Persia, to give them permission to go and open the temple, and to give them permission to go and rebuild the second temple. And that is really, that's God speaking. That's the voice of God acting through history. And what happens is we build the second temple, but it doesn't work. God doesn't dwell there. God is gone. Why? Because only the hands were covered in perfume. The people themselves, the hearts, did not return to God. So this is sad. I was hoping we'll be able to get to the Hasidic interpretation, but it's enough for today. Even though it's a little sad, the poetry is beautiful and the love is beautiful, because the takeaway of all of this, what would be the takeaway? We would expect, going back to the English words, to the words of this actual song, without the commentary, we would expect that after the abandonment, after she cannot find him, and she was beaten, we would expect that she would say, you know what? The guy is gone. Let me find somebody else. Instead, this negative experience of being beaten, and she's trying to find him and she can't, that inspires her to tell the daughters of Jerusalem, when you find him, tell him I am lovesick. And then all the great descriptions, this is the first time, I think, this is the first time she praises him. Up to this point, he's praising her. When does she start talking about his beauty? Is in response to the exile. In the exile, she realizes how beautiful he is. So this is, in fact, a very interesting way of looking at Jewish history, where it's not an abandonment, but this is a process in the love story between God and the Jewish people. And some of the most intense moments of love and the description of the devotion to God happen, ironically, in the exile. So this is very beautiful, I think. And if we're still here, it's because of the song. Because she says the takeaway of the story is, if you find my beloved, tell him I am lovesick. Now, This song, I was going to sing it. This song, they made a song out of this. And I think that this song was written, I don't know for sure, because there was a song written, I don't know if it's this one. There was a song written by a Holocaust survivor. One of the Hasidic rabbis was a Holocaust survivor who wrote a song on these words. Verse 8, and think about this in the context of the Holocaust. Okay, so we were smitten like no other time, right? The guards, the nations of the world found us and they smit us and they took away our jewelry. What is our response? What do we tell? What do we tell the Gentiles? Well, we tell them, I adjure you, O daughters of Jerusalem, if you find my beloved, what will you tell him? That I am lovesick. And it's a beautiful song, and I was going to play it, but the problem is the guy next door is blowing the leaves. I was going to play it. It's 3 minutes. I like it. It's a pretty cool song. I'm show you a kid playing it, a kid singing it, but there's all kinds of renditions. So for those who need to go, those who need to go are free to go. Stop the recording.